We're going to get started here around cybersecurity for small and mid-sized business. And again, this conversation is focused on small and mid-sized business. I want to make sure you understand that we are talking about you and cybersecurity does affect you. Here's some interesting quotes. A lot of folks have said this first quote, but I quoted John Chambers, the former CEO of Cisco. There are two types of businesses, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. Might not be quite that black and white, but there is a lot of truth to that statement. And if you think this is only the big businesses that are getting hacked, study by IBM, small and mid-sized businesses were hit by 62% of cyber attacks in the last period that they reviewed. 62% of all attacks targeted you. 43% of those attacks were the small end of the small and mid-sized business. So again, you are the target whether you believe it or not. Hopefully you'll leave today understanding what that means, and I'm going to hopefully give you some things to think about and take back to your businesses that will help you protect your businesses in a better way. Lastly, some study by Ponyman suggests that it is not inexpensive, even for small and mid-sized businesses, to clean up after an attack. These numbers are shocking. I looked into them. They include lots of things like the cost of the forensics experts, the cost to interface with customers, the cost of lost customers, the cost of discounts to retain customers who are very upset with you because you've lost their information. So $690,000 for a small business and over $1 million for a mid-sized business. Think about those numbers in the context of your balance sheet. This is important. Okay, some other key statistics I'd like to share. Over half of organizations that had a breach got scrutinized and criticized. That kind of makes sense, but don't forget the brand impact to your organization is real. 22% lost customers, 29% lost revenue. Again, it's a real impact. Billions of records lost every year. Yahoo breach and many others. The data is flying out the doors. Some of that data is coming from your organizations. It's in your face all the time. Every third visitor to your website, according to a study, is a bad bot. It's a malicious actor trying to find ways into your organization. Every third visitor, think about the quantity of attacks or potential attacks to your organization. 5.5 million new things connected daily, according to Gartner. The attack surface, and when I say attack surface, that means any way that an attacker could use to get into your organization to exploit a vulnerability. 5.5 million new things a day. Phishing used to be a big deal. It kind of subsided, and all of a sudden it's back in our faces, 250% increase. It's how the attackers get into your organization. 2/3 of email today is spam. And according to Forrester, there's some different numbers around this, but 58% of breaches were caused by internal incidents or partners. So be thinking about the full scope of your organization. If you've heard of the World Economic Forum, they meet in Switzerland every February, I believe it is, and they talk about global risks. This year, they identified cyber crime and cyber risk as a top 5 global risk. Big deal. And it's connected to so many things. More information from the World Economic Forum. This is a graphic of all of the interdependencies. So it's a very complex problem that you're dealing with, and it can be overwhelming. So we're going to talk about why people do it, how they do it, how you can fix it. This is a statistic, about 3/4 of the attackers, makes sense, want money. They want industrial secrets, they want nation-state activity, but most of the attackers want cash. And you might think, well, we're not a major bank, we're not a major healthcare organization, what's the point? Why should I be worried? That's the target, not me. If you haven't already come to believe you're a target, I'll give you some things that they might be after. For example, do you take payments? Do you pay vendors? Do you have customers? Do you have employees? Do you pay those employees? Probably by direct deposit. Do you have W-2 information? Okay. Those are all high-value targets. How about intellectual property? Now, you may not have invented the new steering mechanism for autonomous vehicles, but maybe you have improved your manufacturing process that gives you a competitive advantage over your competitors. That's a target. Maybe you've got some business plans. Your strategy around mergers, acquisitions, market expansion. Those are valuable pieces of data. How about computers? We all have computers. Criminals can use those computers to attack other people, to mine for Bitcoin, to do lots of things to make them money. How about an account at a financial institution? I'm gonna assume everyone in here has at least one account at a financial institution. And you probably use that account to make payments via ACH and wires. And you probably manage your business through that remotely. Are you a vendor for other firms? Do you have suppliers of yourself? You have to think about the scope of that attack surface. It's not just this one server in my data center. It's all of the pieces that connect to your network. And do you use new technology? I think everyone is always looking for the more efficient opportunity. How do I better deliver services? How can I lower my costs? We're all thinking about that. Well, let me introduce you to Starburst the Unicorn. Starburst the Unicorn and her cloud pet friends. Earlier this year, security researchers identified that this little toy had a major security vulnerability because it was connected, as is everything these days, is connected. I bet the people, when they bought these little plush animal toys, they probably weren't thinking about data security risks. Well, you probably aren't thinking about Starburst the Unicorn, but think about the things that are in your environment. For example, how many of you use HVAC remote monitoring, remote servicing? Because it lowers costs. You don't have to pay the vendor to come on site to change a setting. How many of you use security systems with remote locks and data access controls? How about coffee systems? Do you have a vendor that delivers coffee? Some of those vendors are now connecting those devices to your network so they can find out when to come and give you more supplies or when the unit needs maintenance. One of the things I did before leaving corporate America not that long ago was look at a vendor who wanted to put the vending machines on the internet. It's happening, and if you're not aware of it, those are all places that could be exploited, ways to get in. Here's a short list. I won't go through the whole list, but one that hit Minnesota company recently was the 465,000 hackable, I use that term with care, with caution, but 465,000 pacemakers that had to be recalled because of a cybersecurity risk. Think about a product or something that you deliver, if you had to pull it all back in because you forgot to worry about security, what kind of an impact that might have. How about things like cloud services? Who uses cloud services? Software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, AWS, Azure, or maybe more directly, Salesforce, Workaday, LogMeIn, Dropbox. These are all things that are cloud services. They've become very common. They're low cost. They're typically easy to access. They don't require a lot of IT investment, and they frequently don't account for security risks. And so you have to think about that when you enter into a relationship with a vendor like that. How about data collection? We've learned that if we collect more data about our customers, we can make good business decisions, we can be more effective in our processes, collect. Well, having all that data makes you a bigger target and increases your liability. So think about what does it mean to collect all that data. All these things can increase your complexity and increase the attack surface and make it easier for bad people to do bad things to your organization. Actually, I'll want to touch on one more thing. There's been several instances of large companies, one of them in this market, who have been hit with a cyber attack that turns out came through one of their providers, one of their service providers. This is a scourge on the planet. I tell you, the growth, I've been in cybersecurity for 20 years, and the growth of this fraud and this crime is just amazing, or sickening, however you'd like to look at it. But it's very effective, and it's very structured. You'll notice that they help you with a timer, a clock, at the top there. If you pay me within 2 days, 23 hours, and 58 minutes, it's this cost. Your files will be lost in a couple more days after that, where the cost goes up at that point. They offer help desk. So that whole Bitcoin challenge, if you engage with them, they'll work with you so they can get their ill-gotten gains, because they'd rather have you pay than lock the files. But I will caution you, while the FBI has come out and said, please don't pay because it supports an illegal economy, I'll also caution you to say, even if you pay, there is no guarantee. And there are a number of cases where the company paid because they had no other option, and they still didn't get their files back. So ransomware is exploding growth. They're getting very good at it. They adapt their services. One of my favorite examples, I think it was last year, they actually called the schools in the UK to tell them that there are sensitive testing, the standardized testing information coming to the school. We can't send it to the regular address because it's sensitive. We need to send it to the teachers directly. Could you give us the teachers' email addresses and we'll send it to them directly? Okay. So what did that do? Two things. Gave them live email addresses to target, and that administrator probably got off the phone and called the teachers or sent them an email. Oh, hey, I just got a call from the National Testing Service, and you're going to be getting an email, and it's going to have this sensitive info, so be careful with that email. How many of those people do you think clicked on the link? Every one of them. They learn business processes, how you take resumes and HR. They have it outsourced as a service. It's a real problem, and you are in the crosshairs. Here's a few examples. We probably all remember Hollywood Presbyterian last spring was the first company to have national exposure to this. They were out of business for a week. They had to send patients down the street. Think about your business in the same fashion. If you couldn't get to the data that's important, what would that do to your company? Business email compromise. Small and mid-sized businesses are probably, by number, the largest the impacted party to this kind of an event. So if you're not familiar with this is the criminal finds information about your company through your website, through news articles. Your marketing folks are always promoting what a good job you do, which is great. You got partnerships with these companies. They figure out who works at your company. They figure out who's in charge of finances, and they send emails that are spoofed from those sources. So, for example, I used to work at Bremer Bank. Look at the bottom example there. If I registered BREMMER, which is not how you spell Bremer Bank, I could register that domain if it's still available, and I could send you an email, and I would bet 9 out of 10 people would not look at the address closely enough to notice that there's 2 M's, or change an I to an L, or an L to a 1. Those are the ways they get in the door, and because they know about who makes payments, they'll ask the CFO to wire money. And it can be a large amount of money. As a banker, I dealt with this with clients, and it happened all the time, and it's hard to get that money back. So it's much more effective to have processes and controls in your organization to say if you get a wire request, you have to call. You have to go stand and I recommended go walk to the desk of the person who you think requested it and ask them. If they're not at their desk, call them. If the email says I'm at a funeral and I can't take a call, text them or call them anyway, because there's always some sort of urgency, there's always some sort of reason I can't respond. Just don't do it. An extra half an hour, an extra hour, take the risk and call. Don't take the risk and send. Take the risk you'll upset someone versus the risk you're going to lose $500,000. I mentioned they use social media and publish information. They figure out process and partners. They spoof addresses. It's always urgent. They use spear phishing and whaling. Everybody heard of spear phishing? Everybody knows what phishing is? Blast out 1 million emails and hope 2 people click on the link. Well, spear phishing is learning a little bit about the target, about your company, and sending emails that are maybe from a coworker, pretending to be from, you go to Facebook or you go to LinkedIn and you figure out who works there. And I send you an email pretending to be from someone that you know in your company. You're about 1,000 times more likely to click on that email. I think it's somewhere around 2/3 is the success rate for a well-crafted phishing email. Oh, here's some good examples. People don't respond anymore till you've won something. We've figured out you're never a winner on the internet, so that's not effective. But if you pretend to be a coworker or you push on their sensitivities, like, oh my gosh, did you see this picture? Certain generation might be more impacted by that than others, but those are the kind of things they do. The underground economy is an economy. It's an ecosystem that is fully formed. It's just like the ecosystem and business systems that you work within. They're mature, they're developed, they have subcontractors, they have separated services, they can scale, you can outsource a help desk for multiple languages, as I mentioned in the ransomware example. You can outsource the distribution of your malware, you can outsource the collection of the funds, the money mules. You have to turn that electronic data into cash. It's all available as an outsourcing service, just like you outsource payroll and you outsource janitorial services, perhaps, whatever it is. It's the same for them as it is for you, except they're stealing your money. So this is an example from Krebs on Security, a blog that I recommend you take a look at online that tells you the value of a hacked email. Password resets, additional fun. There's a lot of value in stealing your email account. Escalation of privileges. There's a lot of value of getting into your organization and getting to data, getting to hardware. So a couple examples there. And don't forget about insiders. So this is a cyber security conversation, but everything touches cyber. Everything touches technology. And insiders can be a major threat. Sometimes small businesses, I think, well, I can trust all my employees. I only have 100 employees or 50 employees. I can trust them. I hired them myself. They're my friends. Well, don't forget, your friends might have a gambling problem. They may have a health issue at home. They may have other financial pressures, a divorce, any number of things that might change their motivation and their loyalty to your company. So, what do? Do we assume everyone in the company is a criminal? No. We put controls in to protect us. So, on a larger scale, for example, San Francisco had an IT administrator who changed all the passwords and then left because he was upset because he didn't get paid enough money. All the passwords were changed. They couldn't manage any of their equipment. They had a choice. Make him tell us the password or replace all of our IT. He went to jail for that. I think he eventually gave him the password, but think about it. If it took a month to get that information, you couldn't run your business effectively for a month. Think about those insider folks who, they may not be intentionally trying to harm your business. Maybe they just aren't following process, or they aren't properly trained, or they're in a hurry, they've got too much to do, they accidentally misconfigure something. They get taken advantage of by a criminal who's socially engineered them. Social engineering, we've all heard of that. Using social interaction to force an issue to take action. So for example, spearphishing and phishing are social engineering. I'm pretending to be your friend to get you to take action clicking on the link. Or in this case, it's maybe give me the password or or send the wire for me, etc. Errors and accidents, you might lose a USB drive, negligence. Intentional malicious acts, of course, can always happen by disgruntled employees, but I think the vast majority of insider issues actually happen through accident, and they're in a hurry, and they weren't trained properly. So there's some accountability on the owners and the leaders as well. And don't forget, those employees, they're consumers. What are they doing at work during their break, or hopefully during their break? They're surfing the web. They're buying Christmas presents. They're sending personal emails. They're interacting in the world. And by the way, Sophos does a study every year about how many bad websites there are out there that they could accidentally run across to infect your company. The recent numbers show about every 3 seconds, another bad website is available for your employee or yourself to click on. Every 3 seconds. And they're not bad websites in dark corners of dirty places that you wouldn't go. They're the local hockey association, or the church website, or small businesses that don't have the resources or expertise to properly secure their website. Suddenly they become infected and are able to infect your customers. So think about if your website gets compromised and all your customers come there because you give good information on your website, while they're there they get infected. How long will it take before people put 2 and 2 together and 500 infections and they're all your customers? Maybe they have fraud as a result. Talk about brand reputation, brand impact. That's very negative. We've talked about third party, and we're going to hear from an expert after this presentation on third party risk. But just know the numbers vary, but a large percentage of potential risk resides in those third parties. So, lots of variation, lots of variability. The key to taking action is really to understand your risk and think about what you have and use a defense in depth approach. Have you heard of that? Defense in depth basically means you can't put one control in place and expect it to solve all your problems. Oh, I bought a cool Blinky box tool that my security vendor said will fix all my problems, and I installed it, and I can go into the server room and I can see it blinking. I'm protected. No, that might be one layer of controls. You have to think about all the different ways people could take advantage of your systems, exploit vulnerabilities, etc. So how do you learn about some of these threats? And I'm not going to go through these, but I want to share this source of information. It is valuable information. It's free. It's updated every year. All of the security vendors, or most of them, produce security reports, and they all have an executive summary, so you don't have to read the whole 75-page report, but they can be very valuable. Sophos, Verizon, McAfee, CrowdStrike, the list is endless. And so in the deck, there are some examples of findings from some of the most recent reports. I will share a couple things from the Verizon Data Breach Report, which is kind of the standard. They do a huge study every year and share their insights. And so we'll look at a couple slides. For example, perpetrators used hacking. Well, okay, so some of the advice maybe isn't that mind-blowing or revolutionary, but they do have other information that is helpful. 66% of malware was installed via malicious email attachments. So what does that stat tell us? 2/3 of the bad stuff that happened came through email. Maybe I should double check my email system and make sure I have control, since 2/3 of successful hacks came through that channel. You can look at by industry. If you want to figure out your industry, what's the volume? Are you in retail? Are you in hospitality? You can learn about your industry through these reports. This is a good graphic of denial of service, for example. Tends to hit education, finance, IT, and retail more heavily than other organizations. So again, you can think about what industry am I in and how am I impacted by this grand scale of criminal elements that are trying to hurt us. Some more interesting data. Phishing targets manufacturing and IT. Manufacturing. We're talking about manufacturing. How many manufacturing-related entities in here? Anyone? A couple. Why would phishing be a top issue for manufacturing? Any thoughts? How much time and effort do manufacturing companies traditionally put into cybersecurity up to this point? I'm going to say generally, there are exceptions, generally not a lot. So it's probably easier to get into an organization like that through phishing than maybe a bank who's got training and controls. So, or denial of service. Who would be most impacted by denial of service? Banks and retail, that makes sense. So that's available in the deck. Ponyman is an organization that's been doing some research around the costs and impacts of data breaches for many years. They're kind of the standard, so I'm going to very briefly touch on a couple of their reports. And I mentioned earlier the cost of a breach, I wanted to show you, includes forensic experts, credit monitoring, customer hotline for interaction, future product discounts, in-house investigations, communications and notifications, and then lost customers. So there's a lot of things that impact negatively your financial situation. When you read the report, you have to read their methodology to find out how did they come up with their numbers, what did they include in the breach. So I'll use this number, and it's, by the way, not stratified by size. So the number I'm going to share is big, $225 per record. Now that's across all industries and across all sizes for the U.S. Smaller businesses, I think, have a slightly lower cost, but it's not zero. It's closer to $225 than zero, I would bet. So you can use this to kind of get a feel for the impact. Because, by the way, security and IT security and cybersecurity is not an IT problem, it's a business problem. Well, the converse of that is how much money am I losing if I'm not secure? This is how you can kind of understand that. So health and finance are always the winners on this, the highest cost for the breaches. And you can look through this. Churn rate. Banks, health services, technology services, life sciences, communications have the highest churn rates, meaning they lose customers when there's a breach. If you're lucky enough, and I don't think we have any of them here, but if you're lucky enough to be part of the public sector, you don't have any churn. And anybody know why the churn rate is so low for a breach for a public sector entity? In order for me to change the service provider for my real estate taxes or my local services, I have to move. I have to sell my house and go somewhere else. Versus if my bank screws up, I just have to turn off my automatic payments and open another account and turn them back on somewhere else. And by the way, the banks have figured out that that's the barrier between moving, so they'll automatically do that for you. So anyway, just be aware of churn, lost customers. Here's some info on if you have a lot of third-party involvement, extensive cloud services, and compliance failures, you'll lose more money than if you have an incident response team. Is the most effective way to minimize the impact. You can't always eliminate the impact, but you can reduce the impact. So this deck is helpful that way to help you think about it. The cost of cybercrime is another one of their studies, very similar to the previous study, but what I wanted to point out is if you do high-risk activities, like acquire or divest in a company, launch a new product, enter a new market, move to a new geography, those are things that increase the likelihood that you'll be a victim of cybercrime and increase the cost of that. So think about those things. Conversely, if you have advanced procedures for backup and recovery, that reduces your cost and loss. And again, why does that happen? Because if you can quickly recover after a ransomware attack, why would you pay the ransom? And how long are you out of business? Much shorter time. So these things make sense, but if you don't think about them in the context of your organization, sometimes it's hard to understand what to do next. One last study from Ponyman is specifically small and mid-sized businesses, companies from less than 100 to up to 1,000 employees. 61% of those companies have been attacked, with 54% had a breach, meaning they lost data. Now this is a targeted small business study. This is you. And you may have even participated, I don't know, but you could have because you were in the target zone for this study. So a couple of key stats. The attacks are going up, we know that. Ransomware is a big deal, we knew that. 9,350 records average loss per breach. That's average for this small business group. So do your math, 10,000 records times $225 a record, maybe we're going out of business. 225, I mean, think about the scope or the impact. That's what the value of this is, understanding what could happen, what's the real number, how do I talk about this in my company in a business context, because if I talk about it in an IT context, you may not be successful because IT is over there. You just take care of IT and we'll take care of the bit. No, they're together. They're part of the same thing. 54% say that their breaches in small and mid-sized companies were because of a negligent employee. So big concerns about employee training, employee awareness, et cetera. And on the last bullet there, personnel, budget, and technologies are the reason that they have problems. Is that consistent? Everybody has all the budget they need. They all have all the trained people they need, technology that they need. No, that's the problem. So you have to find the balance and make it work. So this is a cybersecurity seminar, but we wanted to talk at least a little bit about general scams and fraud because, again, you're a target for that as well because, again, you have money. You may not think you have enough money, but you have enough money. You have enough data to make it worth their while. Some old school scams, directory scams, will list you in this directory. It used to be at an actual telephone directory. Now it's online somewhere. You'll increase your sales by 20%. Whatever the marketing pitch is, it never happens. They charge you a lot of money. They call you up. I'm from Microsoft. You got a virus. I can help. Okay, first of all, why are you calling me? How do you know I have a virus? And you're not from Microsoft because Microsoft never calls. You have to call them. They have too much to do. But it happens all the time, and it's very effective. 419 Nigerian letter. You've heard of the Nigerian letter? Nigerian prince who needs to get $10 million out of the country, and if you give him your bank account, he'll give you 10% of that for your help. Well, they've moved beyond that. I mean, this thing has been going on since the 60s, maybe even before that. When I first got into the business, it was through fax machines. You know, it used to be paper letters, now it's emails, but they've moved on. It's no longer a Nigerian prince. It's some business opportunity. It's always well written anymore. They've figured out typos mean they don't make any money. So they have someone who doesn't make typos. They can write a letter. They can make it sound legitimate. And it's advance fee. They get you in with this huge promise. Oh, I have to bribe this official. I need $10,000. But I'm going to give you $25 million for your trouble. So we'll just take it out of your part, right? Well, I got this problem. This company won't participate, so I need to give them $100,000 to do so. And it grows and grows and grows. I've seen businesses, I've seen examples of personal impact that are very significant. IRS scams, the IRS, again, doesn't call you. They don't call you. They send you a letter, probably certified letter. So if they call you and say you owe us money, it's a scam. W-2, back to cyber. It is the season. Starting January, your leaders and your HR people will start getting targeted with spear phishing emails, trying to pretend to be the CEO or the HR director, asking for the W-2 list of employees so they can do an analysis of some sort. They steal the list, and then they file fraudulent tax returns on all your employees. Doesn't that sound like fun? Billing scams, overpayment, etc. There was a study, 2016 Global Occupational Fraud and Abuse by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Great piece of data for those of you who are in risk management and want to understand fraud. A couple of key items. The median losses experienced by small businesses under 100 employees was the same as the median loss of large businesses around those kinds of frauds. That should wake us up. A 10,000 person company, 100 person company, the average or the median loss for those two groups is the same. So but yet, do you have the resources of a 10,000 person company? No, you don't. Probably. I mean, you might. Length of time. Those scams that lasted longer, which is really easy to have a scam go on for many years if you don't have the right controls in place. Instead of 150,000 average loss, 850,000. So it's worthwhile to think about this. So I have a list in the deck that you can look at your leisure on some things to do to protect your company from these kinds of frauds. Training is always a big deal, both for cyber and for internal fraud. Establish controls, two-factor authentication with your bank, dual approval. If one person makes the wire, that person can't send the wire. It kind of forces the issue. You have to call someone, you have to talk to someone, you have to validate that this is a real wire before the money goes to China or wherever it ends up. The PC could be the vector. Make sure you've got a secure PC. Use tools from the bank. If you have a strong cybersecurity program, you're going to have less losses around this. If it's insiders, some people think if I put controls, if I control my insiders, they'll think I don't trust them. So you have to be careful on how you approach this, but controls for fraud to protect against inside abuse also protect the employee. Think about that. If there's accountability and there's clear logging and everyone knows what their role is and everything is logged, if something bad happens and they didn't do it, there's going to be evidence that they didn't do it. Versus in an uncontrolled environment, if something bad happens and they actually didn't do it, it's going to look like they did. And you're going to have to deal with that, and they're going to have to deal with that. So it's not just controlling and protecting the business. This is for the protection of the employee as well. Segregation of duties, split approvals, like I just mentioned, cross-training, so people can do other people's jobs while they're out of the office. That's a big one. If only one person in your company can do a certain financial function and no one else knows how to do it, and that person never goes on vacation because no one else can do it, there's a fair chance that there's a multi-million-dollar embezzlement going on there. Because I've seen it myself, and I'm sure if we had FBI stories, they would concur that that's how it happens. An insider with long-term access that's highly trusted and the only person who can do certain things. All right, so cyber, what do you do about cyber? Have you heard of laws and regulations? Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, HIPAA, Healthcare Act. Those are laws and regulations. How about standards and frameworks? Well, standards and frameworks aren't law, but they're kind of a best practice. PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. Who's familiar with that? If you take credit cards, hopefully you raise your hand. So that's not a law or regulation, that's a standard. But the standard includes a lot of things that if you do right, will reduce the chances that you'll have a breach. There are other standards and frameworks that I'm going to recommend here, and I'm going to give you some tools to take back with you for the remainder of my time. And we'll have some time during the panel for questions as well. But I would recommend that you use some sort of a framework. Now, why would you want to use a framework? What is the benefit of a framework, perhaps? You didn't make it up yourself. Someone else who's really smart, has a whole bunch of people, came up with this good idea. It's not going to miss anything because all these people put all this time into it. If I sit down at a table and just do it myself, even with my experience, there's a chance I'll miss something or I'll forget, or I won't do it correctly. So use a framework. Here's one example, the CIS Top 20. Who's familiar with NIST, first of all, National Institute of Standards and Technologies? It's a great agency. They publish a lot of guidance for cyber. And when I say a lot of guidance, I mean if we printed it out and stacked it up, it would be at least this tall, maybe 2 stacks that tall. Very difficult to access because it's so much written, so many words, so many pieces of paper. Well, the CIS Top 20 is only 20 items. A little more accessible. And in fact, studies have shown that if you just do the top 5 or 6 of the 20, you're going to be very effective at reducing maybe 80% of your risk. Now, if you take the top 20 and you start with number 20, don't do that. Start with the top and work your way down, just a piece of advice. Another standard that's become very popular and very effective, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. It's based on 5 components: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. That's a good mindset. It's not all about protect. Protect can't be the only thing. Respond and recover is just as important as protecting, because if you can't recover, even if you protect, you can't protect all the time, right? It's not if you get hacked, it's when. There are 2 kinds of businesses, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. So you have to not just protect your data, you have to be ready to recover and respond. So one of the challenges about this document, even though it's very much easier to use than the previous, it's still 100 pages, it's still very heavy. And so, although 50% of companies, not just government agencies, will be using this by 2020, according to NIST research. So they've developed last fall a brand new standard specifically for small businesses. So this standard is linked on the website. You can go and download it and read it. It's about 30 pages of content plus some appendices. I'm going to quickly run through the index here to give you a feel for it. Then I have some last comments that you can do if you can't get to this level of detail. So it starts out by understanding your risk. I've already mentioned that. If you don't understand what you're protecting, if you don't understand why it's important to take action, you'll be less effective at actually implementing effective controls. So identify what information, determine the value, develop an inventory, etc. Next, identify. Identify who has access, who needs access, what kind of access do they need? Do my employees, are they good people? Or are they criminals and I just didn't know it? So do background checks. Require an individual password, an individual account. Does anyone at their company allow people to share credentials into your systems? Don't raise your hand if you do. because you shouldn't. And if you do, take another look. That's one of the biggest risks. Everyone needs their own account. So that's the kind of things you'll see and identify. Who has access? What kind of access do they need? Protect. Limit the access. If you have a help desk person, they may need access to all of your customer information because they may be taking calls from any one of your customers. However, the person on the floor who repairs the machinery probably doesn't need that access because they don't interact with customers. Many times, everyone who's got an account has the same access. An easy way to reduce your risk is to make sure that that person who doesn't need access doesn't have the access. But you have to understand your company and your employees to do that. Patch, install software to firewall software and protection, secure your wireless, set up web filters, etc. Detect. So you've put in controls to protect your organization. Now you have to watch. Is someone doing something bad? Is it possible that I'm being hacked right now? So detection around alerts from antivirus, logging from systems. Respond. Have an incident response plan. I think the question, who has an incident response plan? Not very many hands, right? Okay. If you've never talked about responding, no one's going to know what to do. If you're lucky enough to have your best and brightest in the building exactly when the incident happens, it might still work out for you. But what if it happens on a holiday weekend after doors close on Friday afternoon? Because, by the way, that's when it always happens. Where are they? They're on a vacation to Hawaii. Whatever. They're not available. If you don't have it written down, nobody knows who to call. When do we call law enforcement? When do we call our partner? We've got a partner we've established in advance, by the way. Because if I'm calling a vendor as it's happening, not the best time to call the vendor. You establish these relationships ahead of time, and in your response plan, you know who to call. And then recover. Backups, backups, backups. Today, and that'll change, by the way. It changes every year. In a couple of years, ransomware, I hope, will be passé because enough controls, there won't be enough money in it. They'll move on to something else. But until they do, backups are critical. Recovery. How do we reinstall the backups? How do we protect ourselves through cyber insurance? Who has cyber insurance in the room? Just a few. Those that don't have it, have you thought about it? Okay, if you haven't thought about it, you should at least look into it, but understand it is not the answer to every problem. You have to find the right coverage. It has to be affordable for your business. It has to cover the things that are important to you. If you don't have a website, but 80% of the benefits in a particular policy are about recovering your website, why would you buy that policy? So you have to do it effectively. You have to do it with thought. So in the appendix, there are some nice features about how to think through the problem. So this is how you come up with your risk, vulnerabilities and threats, the likelihood of that happening, and what is the impact. So some tables that you can go through when you get back to your office. This first one is identifying and prioritizing the type of information you have. We have client information. We have business plans. We have sensitive intellectual property around a process. What are the types of information that are important enough to protect? You can write all that down here and understand the impact if you lost the information, if it was corrupted. What would that mean? If you couldn't get availability to it, what would that mean? Next, you take an inventory. What devices is that information located on? This is a great example. Think about small healthcare. They're a big target right now because they've got doctors and providers that we use technology, but it's not very well controlled. They aren't part of a larger system. Maybe it's a small system of doctors in one clinic. So the doctor's cell phone has email, calendar, customer contact info, photos possibly of clients. You may have heard of some breaches where famous people, at least, the photos of their plastic surgery gets leaked. Brand impact, really big deal. They have social media. There's a lot of data on that device. Knowing that there's data on that device is important. Then you have to look at what's the threat around all of those things. Who's going to steal it? If they steal it, what's the impact? What's the likelihood? And you take all that and combine it together to decide what to do first. Would you start with the things that have low impact and are unlikely to happen? No, you ignore those for now because the impact is low. You start with the things that are probably going to happen sometime in the next month and would really impact my business. So this helps you prioritize. So if you haven't thought about the maturity, so that's a fairly mature organization. When you go through that exercise, you raise the maturity of your cybersecurity program to a pretty good level. If you don't know what your maturity is, I urge you to look at some of the slides around understanding your cybersecurity maturity. This happens to come from Krebs' website again. Are you in the camp where cybersecurity is a necessary evil? We do it because someone told us to, and we really don't want to spend time on it, but we think we probably better because someone might ask. Or are you of the camp that says, We want to build security into all of our processes so that our customers are confident that when they can trust us and we can do services for them, and that will just be part of our package. So where are you in that spectrum? You want to be closer to proactive than reactive. So those are a few examples in the slide deck. If you can't do the whole 30-page NIST document, I've included the SBA top 10. It's effective to at least walk through this list, so protect against viruses, etc., secure your networks, some basics. Establish practices and policies. If you haven't established policies and provided that information to your employees so they know what they're supposed to do, how can you hold them accountable? Require employees to use strong passwords and change them. If you allow your employee to use the same password at work that they use for their Gmail account and for the Star Tribune website and every other account on the internet, how long do you think it's going to be before some hacker takes over some website, gets that credential, and tries it on your network? It happens all the time. Payment cards, make sure you're following the rules around that. Backup copies, so we've talked about this, but this is the top 10 list from the SBA, derived from their research. Control physical access, don't leave computers out in the lobby unattended. Mobile devices are high risk for most companies. And make sure you're protecting all of the aspects of your internet facing, the attack vectors. Not just the cart. The cart is important, but so is everything else, because they can get in that way. If you don't have resources of your own, leverage your providers and partners. If you have insurance, talk to your insurance company. They may be able to help. If you have an audit firm, they may be able to help. If you don't have any partner for IT, think about whether you should have one, because unless you have the internal resources, which most of you don't, you may need a partner. Take advantage of those things. Share information with companies that are like you, because you're all in the same boat. You're all being attacked by the same criminals. Share that information. Develop relationships in other companies in your industry. It can be very helpful. And at the end of the day, security can't be the only thing you're doing. You're in the business to deliver service or deliver product that make money so that you can all come back again tomorrow and do it again. So security has to be balanced against the business processes and the business requirements. If you can't do the top 10, I urge you to at least take this slide and think about it. Just think about your business. What is important to your business? Understand what it is you should be worried about. Train them. Give them the tools and the requirements. Do a walkthrough of your incident process. Those two things will at least open your awareness to think about things, and then give someone the accountability, assign them the role of security. And it gives them some time to go back to the checklists and work through that. If you don't have time to do everything today, which you don't, at least take some sort of action. So in your materials, there are some links to some very helpful resources. A couple of these links are for training. You can just put your employees down in front of a 30-minute video that's pretty well done to get yourself started on the training, and other checklists as well. I leave every presentation with this slide. You don't have to run faster than the bear, just faster than the slowest guy falling down there with the camera. If you do the basics, if you protect yourself to the level that's better than the average, you will avoid most, not all, but most of the risk. So think about, you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to do it all today. But if you don't start today, you'll never reach that level. And just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. So, I'm a security guy my whole life, so people think I'm paranoid, and yes, I'm paranoid, but they're there. They're out to get you, so don't forget that.